Hello and welcome to Straight Onto Disney, a Disney deep dive and analysis podcast, where each week I, your host Jonathan, takes a deep dive into the history of each Disney film and the legacy that they left behind. I'd like to remind you that you can follow me on Instagram at Straight Onto Disney Pod, and you can email me your thoughts at straightontodisneypod@gmail.com. Hello and welcome to this week's Straight Onto Disney, where I'm going to be chatting all things Sword in the Stone. But before we get started, there's a tiny bit of mousekeeping to attend to. Captain Jack Sparrow has been added to the Not So Scary Halloween entertainment at Walt Disney World, and that is followed up by that I went and saw Toy Story 5 in cinemas last weekend, and what a film it is. Obviously I'm going to have a full-on episode where I dive into my thoughts on Toy Story 5, but Pixar made me cry again, so well done, Pixar. Sword in the Stone was directed by Wolfgang Reifman, produced by Walt Disney, story was by Bill Peet. The film stars Sebastian Cabot. The film stars Sebastian Cabot, Carl Swan. The film stars Sebastian Cabot, Carl. The film stars Sebastian Cabot. The film stars Sebastian Cabot, Carl Swenson, Rickle. Sorry, my. The film stars Sebastian Cabot, Carl Swenson, oh my fucking god. The film stars Sebastian Cabot, Carl Swenson, Ricky Sorstein. No, it doesn't. The film stars Sebastian Cabot, Carl Swenson, Ricky Sorensen, Junius Matthews, Ginny Tyler, Martha Wentworth, Norman Aiden, Alan Napier, Richard Reifman, and Robert Reifman. Music was by George Bruns. The film was edited by Donald Halliday. The studios was Walt Disney Productions. Its distributor was Buena Vista Pictures. The film was distributed by Buena Vista Distribution. The film was released December 12, 1963 at its premiere in London, and was released December 25th, 1963 of its general release. The film has a running time of 79 minutes and was released in English. The film had a budget of $3 million, and its gross revenue was $22.162.353 million. That might be million, that might be billion, I'm not sure. So, hang on. So, hang on. So, this week's episode might be a bit short, especially the production history, which, as you know, it's okay because Sleeping Beauty was 3/3 production history. But what's really interesting, and I've tried to dive into this across Google, online, trying to find things, there's very little when it comes to the production history for Sword in the Stone. So it's kind of a bit harder to work this out. And obviously there's a lot less legacy as well. So it's really interesting diving into this. Many scenes from Sword in the Stone are actually recycled animation from other Disney films. And then obviously some of the animation from this film would also be recycled itself into other films. So that's incredibly interesting to see from here. However, what I did find is some bit of production history here. There's not a lot here, but there's some small things here that I've been able to find. So obviously, as we discussed this week, after 101 Dalmatians' success with audiences and the box office, the Disney Animation Studios was saved. What was notably known at this point was that Walt Disney's focus was clearly away from the films, from animated films. And obviously, films such as The Parent Trap, The Shaggy Dog were proving much more successful, and obviously, understandably, that's where his attention was going towards, rather than the animation company that he had created. So obviously, the writers and story departments kept pitching Walt film ideas that he wasn't fussed about, and that tried to find something that would recapture his attention, not only of the audiences but also Walt himself. So back in 1939, Walt had purchased the film rights to T.H. Werner's novel, The Sword and the Stone, and had been put off on the back burner along with a lot of other titles, obviously due to the World Wars. They're coming back up, everyone. It was often listed as being in active development. So, after the success of 101 Dalmatians, Walt then decided that to just off the idea of doing Sword of the Stone. And therefore pitted against other animated films of the time, including Edmund Rostan's play Gentile, I think that is. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. So the Sword and the Stone being being solely adapted by story artist Bill Peet. And obviously he was riding high off the back of 101 Dalmatians, which he had been the sole writer on. And ultimately, he had just seen a 1960 Broadway adaptation production of Camelot, where he had first laid eyes on the idea of the Julie Andrews. He saw strength in the film. So he saw strength in the film mainly from the fact that it would feature anthropomorphic animals as such, like Dumbo and Lady Tramp, and had a narrative that was inherently rooted with magic, such as Peter Pan and Cinderella, which had worked before. Obviously, after 101 Dalmatians, the animators were. So, obviously, after 101 Dalmatians, the animators were experienced with the Xerox photocopying process. Which would continue to save the studio time and time again. And obviously, also would save them from using hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And the Sword of the Stone would be produced in a shoestring box of 3 million, half of what Sleeping Beauty cost, making it one of the most inexpensive productions from the studio since the package film era. To save production costs animators reused often. To save production costs, animators reused earlier. To save production costs, animators reused earlier work, often merely tracing over existing animations, simply using the exact same shot several times over. What's interesting with Sword in the Stone is that the Disney regulars that we've come to know across the last few films, none of them actually appear within this film or voice any of the characters. Wolfgang Reifman, who is known to be the first sole director of a Disney animated feature, forced to seek actors from outside the studios willing to work for them. Well, work for what the production budget allowed them for. For the key role of Merlin, Reifman auditioned over 70 actors for the part. However, none fit the bill of the eccentricist he was searching for. When television actor Carl Svensson auditioned for the role of Talking Owl Archimedes, Reifman would cast him as Merlin himself. Whilst The Sword and the Stone didn't quite succeed in delivering another spectacular Disney villain, the role of Madam Mim was given to Martha Wentworth, who had been known as the Woman of 100 Voices throughout her three-decade who was best known as the Woman of 100 Voices throughout her 3 decades in radio career. She had provided several voices for 101 Dalmatians. For the film's lead role of Arthur, Reifman cast 14-year-old Ricky Sorensen, who unfortunately would hit puberty during production, causing his voice to dramatically deepen. Therefore, Reifman was forced to cast his two young sons, Robert and Richard, to replace him within the film, and re-recorded lines that Sorensen had already provided. So, the film received an Academy Award nomination for Best Score Adaptation Treatment in 1963, but lost out to Imalada. And that's kind of really it for the production history that I've been able to find for Sword and Stone, which is quite interesting that there's very barely little out there to be able to dissect, interact, and know. But what we can see here is that there was an attempt to make this film something that unfortunately didn't become. This kind of Arthurian legend type Camelot-esque film that to a certain To a certain degree it is, but ultimately I just find that it kind of falls a bit flat on that time. And there are times where this film doesn't feel like it's moving along, and maybe that's just my opinion when it comes to this film, is that it does feel like we're in the same point of the film multiple times, so it's an interesting one. The film begins in England with the death of the king, Arthur Pendragon. No heir is named, and so England is threatened to be torn apart by war. Miraculously, the mystical sword in the stone appears in London, with an inscription proclaimed that whoever inscribed with an inscription proclaiming that whomever pulls it out is the rightful king of England. Many try to remove the sword, but none succeed, and the sword is soon forgotten, leaving England in dark ages. Some years later, Arthur, aka Wart, a 12-year-old orphan training to be a squire, accompanies his older foster brother Kay on a hunting trip in July. Arthur accidentally prevents Kay from shooting a deer and goes to retrieve the arrow to make up for his mistake. In the woods, he falls into the cottage of Merlin, a powerful wizard. Merlin announces he will be Arthur's tutor, packs up, and the two return to Arthur's home, a castle run by Sir Ector, one of Arthur's knights and Arthur's foster father. Ector does not believe in magic and refuses to allow Merlin to tutor Arthur. Merlin creates a blizzard and disappears, which persuades Ector to let Merlin stay, a bit in a decrepit old tower with countless leaks. Ector's friend and fellow knight Sir Pellinore arrives with news about the annual jousting tournament to be held on New Year's Day, London. Only this time, whose winner would be crowned King of England. Ector proposes that Kay be knighted at Christmas, and compete for the title, despite Kay's oblivious ineptitude in both jousting and sword fighting. The next day, Merlin begins his tutoring by transforming Arthur and himself into fish, and going into the castle's moat. Arthur is chased and attacked by a pike, and is saved by Archimedes, Merlin's owl. Arthur is sent to the kitchen as punishment after he tried to tell his lesson to a disbelieving Ector. Merlin arrives and magics the dishes to wash themselves. He then takes Arthur for another lesson, where he transforms Arthur and himself into squirrels. Merlin teaches Arthur about gravity and about male-female relationships, as a female squirrel becomes infatuated with Arthur. Merlin laughs at Arthur's predicament until another female squirrel desires him. When they return to human form, Arthur's female squirrel cries sadly when she sees he's really a boy. When they return to the castle, Ector accuses Merlin of using black magic on the dishes. After trying to unsuccessfully undo the enchantment spell on the dishes, Arthur defiantly defends Merlin, but Ector punishes Arthur by first setting him with a mountain of chores. Then essentially told Arthur he cooked the goose for popping off and choosing another boy named Hobbs as Kay's squire. Arthur is devastated, but Merlin convinces him to continue with his education. The next day, for the third lesson, Merlin transforms Arthur into a sparrow. Arthur then accompanies Archimedes on a flying lesson. Arthur is attacked by a hawk and flies down a chimney, landing in the fireplace of Madam Mim, a witch who is a rival to Merlin. Mim's magic uses trickery and opposite and as opposed to Merlin's scientific skill. Mim turns into a cat and chases Arthur around the cottage. Merlin arrives, having been summoned by Archimedelius, and begins to rebuke Mim. Mim challenges Merlin to a wizard's duel, a battle of wits where the players try to destroy one another by transforming into different animals. Mim sets several ground rules, including the rules that only real animals may be used, no imaginary ones like pink dragons, and no disappearing. During the battle, both wizards transform themselves into a variety of animals, with Merlin turning into a turtle, a rabbit, a caterpillar, a walrus, a mouse, a crab, a goat, with Mim being a crocodile, a fox, a hen, an elephant, a tiger, a snake, and a rhino. Finally, Mim transforms into a purple dragon, which is supposed to be against the rules, though Mim knows that she never explicitly outlawed purple dragons. Merlin is able to think quickly and transforms himself into a germ and infects her. Mim is put to bed ill, though it is said she would recover in a few weeks, having learned the lesson that brains always prevail over brawn. Arthur promises Merlin to continue studying seriously. Right. 5 months later, on the snowing Christmas Eve, Kay is knighted, but the same night, during the dinner in his honour, Hobbs comes down with the mumps, and so Ector reinstates Arthur as Kay's squire. The next morning of Christmas, Arthur excitedly tells Merlin and Archimedelius the news. Archimedelius is thrilled by this, but Merlin is disappointed that Arthur still prefers war games over education and congrats him in a sarcastic way. Hurt by Merlin's disapproval, Arthur tries to explain that he cannot become a knight because he is an orphan, so a squire is the best position he can attain. And in his words, for a kid like him, he doesn't know how to move forward in life, especially in times like this. This aggravates Merlin, who transforms himself into a rocket bound for Bermuda. Ector, Kay, Pellinore, Arthur, and Archimedelius travel to London for the tournament. 7 days later, moments before Kay's match, Arthur realizes that he has forgotten Kay's sword at their inn, which is now closed because of the tournament. Archimedelius notices a sword in a stone in a nearby churchyard and points out to Arthur, who pulls the sword from the stone, unwittingly fulfilling the sword in the stone prophecy. When Arthur returns with the sword, and Ector and Sir Bert recognize the sword in the stone, and the tournament is stopped, when Ector asks his adopted son where he got it, Arthur tells them he pulled it out, to which everyone laughs, thinking it was a joke. Demanding that Arthur proves he pulled it, Ector places the sword back in its anvil. Arthur was about to remove it again, but Kay rudely pushes Wart out of the way, saying that everyone can still pull the sword out once it's been pulled, and attempts to remove it himself. But he and none of the other men succeed in removing. Sir Bart and Sir Pillamore tell the others that they should let Wart pull the sword out, and he manages to pull it out in a second. With ease, the knights all proclaim, "Hail King Arthur! Long live the king!" As the crowd, Ector and Kay all kneel to Arthur, asking for forgiveness. The film then cuts to Arthur, now crowned king, sitting in the throne room with Archimedelius, feeling completely unprepared to take the responsibility of royalty. Overwhelmed by the cheering crowds outside, Arthur calls out to Merlin for help, who arrives in 20th century attire, and is delighted to find that Arthur is the king that he had seen in the future. Merlin tells the boy that he will rise and lead the Knights of the Round Table, accomplishing many amazing feats and becoming one of the most famous figures in literature and even in motion picture, such as the film. So that is the film, and honestly, there's not a whole deal lot to talk about when it comes to Sword in the Stone as a whole of a film, and I kind of feel like I might have rushed that a bit, but there's just so much little for this film, and so much little to really talk about, because honestly, I don't think it's the best film in the world, and I think there's some better adaptations of the Sword in the Stone mythology across screen, especially Camelot and Merlin. So ultimately, it's a good film. It's alright. What is the legacy of Sword and Stone? Well, obviously, Sword and Stone is within the Disney parks. It's near King Arthur's Carousel, and you can a sword pulling ceremony hosted by Merlin, where a lucky child who pulled the sword would be declared the temporary ruler of Fantasyland, was a common show until the ceremony ended in 2006 in the Magic Kingdom. The show operates seasonally in the other parks, so it's still there. Sword in the Stone debuted its first parade float in 2020 in the Disneyland's Parade Magic Happens. And that's really it. Obviously, Merlin is a major player within Kingdom Hearts. Sword and Stone characters appear in Disney Magic Kingdoms. Merlin did appear within Disney Infinity, though he did have his own figure. But he did play a role in the Toy Box Takeover game, and you could get Merlin's Tower. And obviously, the Once Upon a Time had a lot of Sword and the Stone, Camelot within. Once Upon a Time Season 5. Do I think it's done great? No. Because it should have been an entire season, but hey ho. I can't wait to get to Season 5 out on here, because I have a lot of thoughts. But yeah, that's really it when it comes to Sword and Stone's legacy. There's so much, and ultimately, that's really it. So yeah, next week will be the Jungle Book, which I'm sure there's going to be a lot to dive into when it comes to the Jungle Book. And obviously, Sword and Stone was meant to be getting a live action, but I don't think that's happening anymore. So once again, it's another film where we're not going to really get that. So obviously, I just want to say I hope if you're in the UK, I hope everything is okay. The heat has been horrendous this week. We're not built for this, the UK. So I hope everybody's been staying safe, dry, having lots of water, drinking plenty. There's not really too much going on at the moment, other than we're gearing up for D23 and gearing up for San Diego Comic Con. So hopefully soon you'll hear some more thoughts and news. And obviously go and follow Tom at Tom02 Disney. Follow along with his and Lauren's magical events in Florida, because they're in Walt Disney World at the moment. So go and see across their socials. I'm sure they'll be putting stuff up on their YouTubes at some point. So, as always, you can follow me on Instagram at StraightOnToDisneyPod, and you can email me your thoughts at StraightOnToDisneyPod@gmail.com. Remember to like this video, subscribe for more, leave your thoughts in the comments. What did you think about Sword and Stone? Do you like it? Do you love it? Do you not like it? Do you think it's not the best? For the comments across YouTube and Spotify, obviously follow along on Spotify and give it a 5-star review. Thank you all for listening, and bye!